This is Seven Seas Cruising Association, and we will be starting the webinar at 7 o'clock.
This webinar is entitled Best Practices Heading North in the Chesapeake to New England through the C&D Canal. There's a disclaimer here. It'll also be in the documents regarding, you can read it if you wish here, but this is something that we'll put in every as a preface to each Seven Seas Cruising Association webinar. It states that we go by experience, and this is a starting point, and others should be students of their own work and develop their skills to have a safe passage. Also, I wanted to remind everyone that a lot of what you'll see in this presentation, there's copyright and there's proprietary data. We want to respect the fact that we have subscriptions to a lot of the services out there that people invest in and we pay, and we are bound to respect and comply with terms and conditions that we agreed to. So tonight, just some logistics. So there's going to be a chat section that you can chat, make comments if you wish, but if you do have a question, the officers, panelists, and Joan Conover, the president, will be monitoring questions and answers. So if you have a question you want to ask, and we're going to reserve time at the end, please do that under Q&A at the top of the screen or wherever your little toolbar is. Use Q&A, find it now. If you have a question, put it there. The question should be there and not in the chat section. Okay, so we'll present best practices. We'll introduce our panelists. I'm going to go through elements of the passage and pilotage planning, and I'm going to talk more to what they call the APEM methodology. It's kind of comes out of the UK. And then I want to dedicate as much time as possible to weather analysis, a weather analysis planning worksheet. And we have panelists that will support this conversation from the National Weather Service. We'll introduce in a minute, Predict Wind, and the Marine Weather Center. The idea is to take all three of these and develop a worksheet to integrate these information sources, and that will be towards the end of the presentation. Then we'll have a summary and we'll have questions. I'd like to leave room for questions. So the products of all this, right? I have developed my own Chesapeake to New England passage plan. It's probably going to be 20 to 30 pages. I do that because it's a long voyage. My experience level tells me I need to plan in detail. So I have a passage plan that will be posted on the website. Also, I've developed pilotage plans, and we'll talk about the difference between passage and pilotage plans in a minute. But I have one of these for every refuge or anchorage or one that I have to find my way into. Also, I had developed a weather analysis worksheet, and we'll go into that in a lot of detail later in the presentation. During all this, I have 11 pages of hot links and resources and YouTube videos, articles, you name it. There's 11 pages of links. If someone like me is going north, even local knowledge and about how to get through New York or what to do when you get up in Long Island Sound, I've tried that is a growing document, so it's still living, and I'll be adding to it. So once again, these are the products of my efforts, and I'm willing to share all this with the membership of the Seven Seas Cruising Association. A lot of material came from the Seven Seas Cruising Association, but versus digging for it, I'm putting it right in front of you, right on a plate right in front of you. So as you mentioned, my name is Mike Barnes. I have I'm nursing a 40-year-old Morgan Out Island out of Swan Creek Marina. I've got a captain's license. I have 2 ABYC certifications. I work as a marine technician part-time now, semi-retired. And this is the vessel that will be leaving the Chesapeake Bay headed for New England. So tonight, we have our panelists include Cadence from Rose Point, and she'll support any questions dealing with Coastal Explorer, which is the navigation software I'm using. We have Hayden Frank from the National Weather Service out of Boston. He's a panelist also to talk to National Weather Service. We have Lisa McWilliams from Predict Wind as a panelist. Chris Parker from the Marine Weather Center is also with us, and a lot of the material in this presentation I've run by all three of these of the panelists. So we'd like to entertain questions. And I want to thank also the folks that actually took time to out of their day to have separate webinars and Zoom meetings with me, including Henry Atterbury out of the Corinthians. Dave Skolnick was a huge help. Dave, he's a professional delivery captain. He knows how to put together a passage plan and address crew issues and all the little details. Beth and Frank and Joan have helped me with dry runs going through this. And then last, we have Todd Edward that had contributed to a few slides I have on the Delaware Bay operational forecast system. That's an emerging best practice, and it's going to get really good in about 1.5 years from now. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, why do passage plans? Well, in chapter 16 of the Annapolis Book of Seamanship, they talked about formulas for disaster that centered around the Fastnet race. And there were 7 different things that they concluded led to emergencies. It's a rushed, ill-considered departure. Your route is dangerous. You have no alternative for a bailout. Your crew's not prepared. Your boat doesn't seem to be prepared. The crew panics after an injury or some incident, and then leadership in charge isn't effective. So a lot of these can be addressed by a detailed and passage and pilotage plan. So you've already gone through it. You've already been there. It's not something that you develop during an emergency. And behind all this is, getting your redundancies on board, having redundant electronic sources for your chart plotter, but also being able to have eyes out of the cockpit and see what's going on, be able to pick up a paper chart if the cockpit goes black, right? So if you don't have your chart plotter, what are you going to do? You need to be prepared for that emergency. So the passage planning is more a UK term, and it came out of the safety at sea, the SOLAS regulation number 34. This was born, the SOLAS regulations came out after the Titanic disaster. And it basically states that before you go to sea, the master will have a detailed plan in place. And, I think calling it a float plan is a little brief. I think it's important to have this, and the more involved it is a reflection of your experience, the size of your vessel, and the complexity of the cruise you're going on. So behind the SOLAS regulation, they put together something, an annex to that, or an IMO resolution. This is all UK, United Kingdom. And they came up with something called the APEM methodology. That's appraisal, right? Gathering information. Everything about this is you're not planning it, you're just gathering data sources, and this took a lot. That's 11 pages of sources cited that I'll share with everybody. And then you get into your detailed planning of the whole voyage from berth to berth. Then you execute it and you monitor your progress. These last two, that's more outside the scope of what I'll be talking to tonight. That's more on board, making sure you make entries into your log. You monitor your progress along the way. But the appraisal part was very important, and I did a lot of work here, and I thought it's worth to share that with other people on the call tonight. What's the difference between a passage and a pilotage plan? The pilotage plan is really, it gets you into and out of a port. It's where you actually bump into things. You're following buoy to buoy. It's hazardous. You want to sketch it out. And I'll show you an example in a minute. It's a smaller plan, but it's very detailed, and it's a subset of this overall passage plan. The passage plan for me is going to be like for 2 weeks. I'm going to go up to Chesapeake, across the C&D, down the Delaware Bay, up the Jersey coast, through New York or around Long Island, and then throughout the Long Island Sound area. So there, it's everything I'm doing is going to be in this passage plan. There's a lot of research and prep. There are a lot of details that I'm putting into this in terms of like departures and arrivals. I want to execute per the plan. There will be changes, right? I will monitor my progress, and I'll deal with changes. I'll do speed adjustments, and I'll make sure that I have safe distances from hazards. Here's a very brief example of something like a day sail, right? This is a pilotage plan. They actually sell this form. You know, the source here is in the UK. This guy actually sells a lot of different forms you can buy to document a passage or a pilotage plan. You just fill it out. It can be very simple like this, but more involved. I think with reasonable Microsoft Office skills, all of us can do this more electronically with cut and paste and graphics. If you know how to insert and delete a row in the table in a Word document, you can put this together and not have it handwritten, and it'll be more digital. Here's the sketch, right? This guy, if his cockpit goes black, right, he can actually find his way into the harbor. He knows his hazards. He knows where the breakwater is here. He knows the course he needs to set. He knows his distance. He can get into the harbor and out safely. So he has that with him if everything else fails. So I put a document together, and each of these are paragraph references. I'll show a couple example graphics. I'm not going to open the document and go into it in detail. But, you know, basically you want to set a schedule of things you need to get done. You want to make sure your vessel and your crew's prepared. You need to talk your vessel specifications and equipment. A lot of the specs actually go into some of the predict wind, like the polars and the modeling of your vessel. You need to know all that. You want that in your passage plan. It's information you don't want to dig for it. All the resources you bring together, right? Whether it's charts, tide, turntables, this is your research. You bring everything together. Then you go into your weather analysis tools, and I have a worksheet that really tries to leverage and compare multiple sources of weather models. You develop a pilotage leg table, and then you've got your routes of, you don't set them, but you basically create a table of routes, and this is still appraising. Should we go, and can we go? Right? You haven't left the dock yet, but should we go? Well, based on what we're finding out here and constraints and restrictions, and can we do it? Is the boat ready to do it? So this is a schedule I shared a lot. I went out to the forums and posted what I thought was a good schedule. People gave me a lot of good feedback. This is your countdown to leaving the dock. It's not everything, but there are a lot of things here that deal with passage planning, and they deal with things with lead times. Like, for instance, if you have an MMSI that's not yours, and it tells people from somebody else's family you have an emergency, you need to get that changed. If you board a boat, sometimes you have to send equipment back to the manufacturer to get that changed. So a lot of things here, like we put our heads together and thought, like, what needs to be on the schedule, things to get done. Over here, I've got my vessel specifications, right? How much fuel I'm carrying. I have that in liters as well as, gallons, because some of the tools you're using are going to look for liters, and I try to do both. All these little hot links are in the document. You click on any one of these, and it'll give you an instruction and a how-to or an operator's manual as to how to operate the radar. So if you have crew coming on board, you want to send them this document. You want to allow that person to open up these hot links and learn how to use the radar, know how the Rose Point, the navigation software, is working. Down here, this is my major toolbox, right? So here I have all my NOAA weather resources laid out, hot links to every one of these. I've got the Marine Weather Center, Chris Parker, I have a hot link to him. They're all on my speed dial, right? So as I'm developing this document, I don't want to go hunt. I've already found it. Down here are on board, I'm going to have all these different apps on either an iPad or an iPhone or an Android. All of these I have on board as backup. So there's a lot of resources here to include, like, you'll see a latitude, longitude expressed in degrees and degrees, minutes, seconds. That's a tough thing to convert if you don't know how to do it. So I basically allowed for that as well. Okay, so some of the tools that I'm using. Whatever you use, exploit it. Know how it works. Every time I go into Coastal Explorer, I found another feature that I had overlooked, and it really saved time. For instance, I can create a route right now, and these little magenta lines are for this leg going down the Delaware River, and you see this narrow area with the current there are ferocious. You want to take advantage of it, leave at the right time. So here, it's going to give me a 1.67 knot credit on top of my cruising speed as I go through there. If I was fighting a foul current, it would be negative. I do the best when I run the best departure time. It's going to calculate all that and give me the right time that looks at each of these tide stations and takes advantage. You want to be careful you don't grab a tide station that's 8 miles away that doesn't give you any credit. So these things I learned as I went through this. I can calculate arrival time at any waypoint. And then in your routes, whatever you're using, you've got these features. Fork a route, split a route, add a waypoint, segment sharing, obstacles, know when you're in 8 feet of water. If you import a route from one of these apps, it may put you in 5 feet of water. That's not good. This will tell you that. This is given the ENCs, the electronic charts, all that's embedded electronically. So it looks, knows the depth, knows your route is, and says, hey, you need, or if you come too close to a buoy, if you're in 8 yards of a buoy, that's not good. It's going to tell you that I'm 49 yards away here. So these are things you want to look to have a safe route. And it's a one-stop shop. I've got, tide, slack tide, ebb tide for any time of day throughout the year. All the tide tables are embedded. I also have sail docs to give me 5 days of weather forecast. That's a backup. My primary source is going to be predict wind. Offshore, I take that with me. I do the download, and I can model while I'm underway. So this route planning, right? You break it down to major legs. This is going down the bay, right? I have a route planning worksheet that looks at tides. These are all little hot links you can click on. I'm trying to find the right way down the bay. And I actually, if you can see over here, I actually meander off to the west to get to some shallow water because at the end of the day, you can't get down there without a foul current hitting you. So instead of hitting 2 knots at the mouth of the Delaware, I want to hit like a half a knot, and that's why I'm moving over here to shallower waters. So I do this route, I get it all done, I can export it, it links to my autopilot, and then through the whole trip, I've got links to all the way through New York, Long Island Sound. I have all my routes laid out, plus bailout points. I developed pilotage plans as well. Every one of these little hot links up here, whether it takes you to the Southern Seven Seas Cruising Association port guide, whether it takes you to Notice the Mariners, whether it takes you to a tide station, a current station, or the best links, if you haven't used these, I'm a subscriber to Waterway Guide. And the cool part about the Waterway Guide is that if you click on that link, it's going to take me right to this magnification to this area at latitude, longitude. Versus starting at the top and having to dig down and mine for this data. It takes you right there. It takes you to the chapter that you need to look at if you want to read about Cape May. And then I'll basically either hand type or copy, bring information in from the Coast Pilot, how to read the range light coming through there, what it looks like. So I can have this in paper if all else fails. Tells me how to get around Cape May Point. And there's a lot of local knowledge within the pilotage plans. Then planning. All that research is done. This is where you put pen to paper and you start, right? So you got your pilotage charts done. You start running weather analysis worksheet. We'll talk about that in a minute. You have your final routing. Now you enter dates and times into your chart plotter, and then we're going to go ahead and execute. You want to make sure you have backup copies, have paper copies along the way. So we covered appraise, planning, then the execute and monitor phase. I'm not addressing right now, but that's really dealing with changes. We talked about that earlier. That's underway and involves your logbook and all. Now, when I did all this research, I did stumble on something that it took me a while to get my head around, but I want to share it with people because others have found it very interesting. There is something that's operational now. It's called the Operational Forecast System. They have them up in the Gulf of Maine, New York, Delaware, and Chesapeake. There's a 48-hour simulation of the and basically the last 40 hours before you go, or you get within 48 hours, go look at the operational forecast if you're in the Delaware Bay or going through C&D Canal or even the Chesapeake Bay, because we've all seen on the Bohemia River, if you want to go anchor there the night before, well, if you had northwest winds or northeast winds sustained high velocity for days, that river could be a mudflat. The bay gets blown out. So they model that. You can find that in a prediction table. You're not going to find that in the Eldridge, but they model that, and it's really cool what they do. It's so contributing to the industry that the pilots use it for all the boats coming up to Delaware Bay. They are about a year from now. I called it the Delaware Bay Operation Fork 2.0. It's in development. I'm telling you, a year and a half from now, when they're done with this, they're modeling from Maine to Florida, right? Every harbor all the estuary influences of the rivers and so winds. They do this 48-hour simulation. So it's going to obviate the whatever you see in the prediction table. Don't look at it or look at it, but know it could change. And sometimes they're aligned, a lot of times they're not when you have these weather situations. That's what this tool is for. They have these animations and simulations that show for current or water. I had a Zoom meeting with Todd Errett and folks from NOAA. They walked me through all this. So you got your predictions, you laid your trip out, but within the 48-hour window, go to the Delaware Bay Operation Forecast System, look at these animations, and you'll see where they can help you. I'm going to go outside the presentation just one time and show you what this looks like. So here, this is the animation that they provide. I asked them, is this tabular? Can I look this in a table like the tide tables? No, Mike, we don't have a tabular yet. Okay, well, I wish they did, but it will be here a year from now. You're going to be able to zoom in on this area. Right now, it's more by inspection. There you go. All those little blue arrows in every different direction at reading point, less than 0.3 knots, that's your slack. And you can see you have a full max ebb happening at the mouth of Delaware Bay. And this is, again, they'll model this for 48 hours. It's taking into consideration rainfall, the fetch on the bay from a strong southwest wind for 2 days. It's taking everything in consideration. It's got the hydraulic effect of the higher water in the Delaware River versus the lower water in tide level in the head of Chesapeake Bay. It's modeled everything. And they work with the University of Delaware and other sources to come out with this. I think that people should know about that. I'm going to use it. I know the guys at the Delaware City Marina, they go by this. This is what because the slack tide, high or low, can be off by 1.5 to 2 hours depending upon environmentals. And that's what's being modeled here. Okay. All right. So I think we've tried to get through that. I know I sped through it. All right, but it's important that we get to this weather analysis worksheet. And once again, we've got we have panelists include Lisa McDonald from the Predict Wind. We've got Chris Parker, is on the call right now. Thank you, Chris. And I may defer to one or more, or we also have Hayden Frank from the National Weather Service on the call as we go through this. Okay, so this is a worksheet. The worksheet that you're going to see, this is my version of it. It's a draft. I'm looking for comment. A lot of this, the process that we go through here, I spoke to Chris Parker from the Marine Weather Center, and if you listen to his calls or you read his emails that come out regarding weather, this is the process that he more or less follows with a couple of tweaks. Okay, first of all, we're going to look for anything. If there's any tropical depression, we do that check right away. If you click on the links down here, it's going to bring you to the area. It's going to come back, say yes or no. And those sources are at the National Hurricane Center. So as you can see by the graph here, they gradually increase in probability through September, and they gradually wane off through the end of December. Now, what the Chris Parker recipe is like, what's it like out there now, right? We're going to get that in a minute. But what I'm looking for in my worksheet is like, this is my leg that I'm going to model, right? From the head of the bay down. This is like 10 hours. It's a whole day leg if you're traveling daylight hours. I have my distance. I got the duration. I've got the wind, what I like and don't like. I've got wave height, what I like. I can take a little bit more than 2 waves on Morgan Island. And I'm also learning more about the wave period. Okay. And precipitation, no rain, right? Maybe light. We want to stay away from squalls and thunderstorms. Okay. So what I'm going to explain now is I called it the trifecta, right? We've got a National Weather Service contribution. We've got Predict Wind, which gives you really, I can put right here in the middle of the bay, and I'll get resolution from their models for the Delaware Bay, right? And I have Chris Parker, who actually provides a verbal briefing about weather windows. He's interpreting all the different data sources. What I'm trying to do is to get ready for that briefing using as many tools as I possibly can, exploiting Predict Wind. There's so much to Predict Wind in terms of the resources available there. make sure you exercise your skills using predict wind well ahead of time. It took me time to get through it. And some of the best resource, you don't even have to subscribe to Predict Wind. You can just go to their website. They have a free version, and all the help tutorials are free for you to use. And if you really want to get into details, it's a subscription required. But by the time you go through all the help files and learn how to use it, you'll want to buy it. So I'm getting ready for the Chris Parker Marine Weather call, right? He's going to look at satellite imagery. He's going to look at radar. We'll find out what's happening in the area. He's going to, that's right here, satellite imagery radar. What I've added is there's a really good app on my Android app. Is not working that well, cloudy. But my dad used to be able to wake up in the morning, listen to the VHF radio as a Coast Guard 100-ton captain, look at the sky, see mare's tail, see what's going on, and predict the weather. He amazed me. I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll get there, but I'll learn along the way. And this little schema here, this worksheet, helps you learn along the way. So I'm looking at a buoy right there. I shipped on shoal in the middle of the bay. I can see conditions the way they are right now. I got tides. Like, I don't need that probably if I put it there. But more important, that in the bay, they're not giving me any wave height or period. There's no stations measuring that right now. So I went out and looked at a coastal resource, right? We've got one off the mouth of Delaware Bay, and we have one off Barnegat. And there I'm going to get wind direction, wind speed, gust, and I can see the wave height, and then the period. These look good. We can deal with 5-6 foot waves if we have 11-second periods. If it's 2 times, but it's still a pretty big wave. So, and you want to look at that, because if you want to go the next day, that may not have settled out yet. Okay, so bottom line up front, right? I have the Marine Weather Center to Mount Holly give me a synopsis of the area. I want to leave by the date I talked about. I think it was today or tomorrow, right? Now, the Chris Parker folks, they're not reporting yet on the Northeast, because everybody, their focus is down south right now, getting people out of the Carolinas and Georgia north. That's where the last forecast that they publicize is going on. This is the United States and East Coast. You can listen or watch the video as they present, and then you also get this email that comes to you in detail. The email has all this information. It's going to have the outlook, what they see going on right now, and then they've got what they're suggesting. And you look at that and says, well, what does that mean? How did he come up with that, right? So this is where my homework starts, or your homework would start. I created this worksheet where I'm using the National Weather Service front that I hear on the call, talking about the lows coming through and highs. And I'm prepared to listen to Chris's briefing and learn from it. So he said that the winds are going to come from the north and the backside of the low. I can see that visually. I'm also taking National Weather Service, Predict Wind, and the Weather Center data, all 3 of them together, looking at them, understanding them. I do that for each different day as I'm approaching my departure. And I can go out like 4 to 7 days on this. Then I'm getting close. I see a decent window. I hear from the Marine Weather Center that people can travel about this day, and I start modeling it from my leg. Remember, we're going from for this leg. The Predict Wind tools can give me the resolution and visibility as what's happening in that area. So I'm modeling. I'm going to leave at 6 in the morning on 4 different days, and this is going to come back and tell me for the weather, with all the models, it's an average of all the models they have, the 6 or 7 models that they're using. It's going to tell me passage times, can tell me, I'm looking for like, okay, how much time do I have wind in the beam? I want minimal time upwind. I don't want to go into it. Time against current, and you can flag these. So you can actually take these and paste these into your little Microsoft Word document. And then you need to do this. You need to collect, you can't keep going to different links and back and forth, right? And jumping screens. You need to consolidate your information, be able to look at it. And they'll go through here and you're looking for like less than 4 degree roll, a less than 0.2 on the vertical accelerations. And okay, I think I've got a good departure time. I got the departure planning correct. Now I'm going to look at, well, how accurate is the forecast? Do the models all align? Right? Like I got general alignment on wind speed. So you're going to go into your forecast graphs. I got general alignment in all the models, 1 outlier there on, but it's not significant. It looks like we have is coming around for this area. Remember, I'm looking at the Delaware Bay. This model is giving me specific values and resolution for that area that I'm asking the tool to produce. Wind direction, I'm not sure anybody knows where it's going here. It's all over the place. I'm a little concerned about that. If I look at that, the weather models don't seem to agree. Then I can look at the maps. So those 4 days that I was trying to pick a departure time, I can look at the forecast and slide. I'm not going to go out to the screens right now. This takes too much time. But you can slide back and forth Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and look at your isobars and your wind bars. You can look at the current, when the ebbs happen, make sure that matches up. Then you can look at your wind values. Just drag the slider back and forth and predict wind, and you can see where you're at. And there's one last step that I didn't have included a graphic of, but there's a you can go to the observations, and you can compare your forecast to the observations at weather stations and see how well they compare. Pick the weather model you want to use for this route. So once I pick a day, right? So here I pick the 29th of March. I want to leave on that day, and then I'm looking at the different models to see how they all came together. Do they correlate? I can see I'm not 100% and really good states on the boat. Wind speeds are not that significant. I come over here and I'm looking at, this is the start, right? I start at 6 in the morning and I'm gonna go all the way to 1500, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, I can see wind speeds gradually increasing over time. It could be as high as 22 knots and models say as low as 14. Direction, everybody's spot on. They all believe they got a strong northerly component. Then I can look at wave height. It increases over time with the wind increasing. And I look at the period, right? So I'm dealing with a 6 or 7 second period for a wave height of 3. That's for a heavy displacement vessel. I'm good with that. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is back up a little bit. We have time. I did speed through this, maybe too fast. I apologize for that. But coming back a little bit. So I can ask some questions from the panelists and we can have a discussion. And also, if we have questions yet, Joan, from folks on the call, you can relay those to us, please. But Chris, I just want to ask Chris Parker, let you take the mic. We can see it right there in front of your camera. Okay. And what are your thoughts about how we would take this little trifecta, I called it, blending NOAA resources. What do you think of the worksheet here, and how would you encourage us to do more or less?
Yeah, Mike, I think that's a really good presentation and a really good approach. I would use, before spending all of my time doing the analysis on the portions of the forecast that are high confidence and low impact, I would spend some time assessing what the time frame is and where I will be when we get some uncertainty between the weather forecast models and when there may be some high impact weather. So when the forecast models on the predict wind chart start deviating from each other, when we get a spread from model to model, I would start focusing my attention on that time frame. So here it would be maybe 00 Zulu on or local time, whichever that is, on Monday. So about the 3rd day into the forecast, we start to get a lot of deviation on wind speeds and directions. I would understand why that is. Is that a significant weather event? Might it be even more significant than the models suggest? Are there thunderstorms? Is there precipitation?
Okay, right.
And focus most of my time on understanding that. As we get into days 5, 6, and 7, we should expect that there is a lot of difference from model to model. So I wouldn't be as concerned about that, but I'd probably be focusing a lot on what happens day 3, because that's not too far in the future, and there is some meaningful difference from model to model. And understand again why that is. Do some digging. Are you comfortable with the worst plausible solution on that day? And if you're not, then you want to come up with other plans for that day, and that's going to have implications for the rest of your trip after that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Lisa McDonald, is there anything that I overtly missed in terms of every time I get into predict wind, is this another resource that there's so many dials and knobs to turn, which is helpful, but then again, there's a lot there, and I'm trying to coalesce of what's your opinion on what would be something we'd focus on, and it would get where do you get the most bang for the buck? What features of predict wind would I want to focus on?
I think, thanks, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great presentation. I mean, it's a great overview of, the lead up, the preparation, and actually getting to your day, leaving the dock. I think it's really important that, as you've outlined, many different types of assets that are available and options for finding and sourcing that information. We at Predict Wind, and me as a fellow mariner, believe that the maximum amount of information you can collate before doing anything gives you the most amount of, best information to base your decision making on. And as Chris said, we all know that with the weather models, the first 3 to 5 days are going to be the closest or the most in agreement for the weather models. Once they start stretching out, they can differ depending on the situation with the air mass. If there's an unstable condition situation for the weather, it can change more frequently. Those are things that I think, from my point of view, it's really important, even in your months leading up to your preparation. Part of your preparation should be watching the weather. Know where you are locally. If you're not based in the Chesapeake area and you're looking at that weather, just start looking at it from home. That will give you confidence in how the weather patterns unfold in that area, and start looking at the big picture. I like Chris's charts earlier of having a big picture across the country, so you're familiar with the weather systems. Right now we're experiencing these massive systems moving across the states, and they're impacting many different areas along the coast. Knowing your seasons, knowing your area before you actually start to get too focused on your time of departure, then once you narrow down your departure date, you've got all these brilliant resources. You can never look at the information too soon, I don't think, is really what my point of view is.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I read from Chris's broadcast this morning, to read this, the situation they have in the Southeast right now. They said that there's no reasonable window until the second week of April. That's a bummer. That means people are going to sit things out, Chris, for a while, right? The weather patterns have not been favorable for people moving north. And I guess they could take ride the ditch up and go to the ICW.
Yeah, there's actually a good window in the very near future.
Okay.
It's a tight window. I think if someone wants to round Hatteras and get up into the Chesapeake Bay, we have a few vessels moving along the southeast U.S. coast, and we're trying to get them to time their transit around Hatteras to sometime between midnight Monday night and about 10 in the morning Tuesday. That'll get them into the bay before dawn Wednesday morning, and we think that that's a good time to make that transit. But aside from that, I'm not seeing really any reasonable opportunities for folks who want to make a 3, 4, 5 day passage over the next 10 days.
Yeah, what you just described, that maybe an experienced couple, husband and wife, that they've done it for 20 years can take that midnight to 10 in the morning voyage. For me, I'm voyaging during daylight hours, and I'm gonna have to sit out someplace waiting for that window. So, okay. I guess I also had I spoke today with Frank Hayden Frank. He's with the National Weather Service out of Boston. I picked Boston because if you think about all the movies, and all the what's happened over time between the perfect storm and all, it all happens off on his watch up there in the Boston area. So what are your thoughts, Hayden, on what sources of information from the National Weather Service? I tried to bring them in. What comes to mind that maybe we can add, or am I looking at the right stuff, or what are your thoughts?
No, I think you've got it down pat. it depends on the specific area that you're looking for. So in the case of, like Delmarva Peninsula, like Jersey Coast, you're going to be referring to the Mount Holly office forecast. One thing you can also find in there in the local office is where you'll get the synopsis. I know you had that pasted on top from Mount Holly. But if you go into their forecast discussion, and you can get that right from their main page, there's actually, they devote, all the coastal offices devote a section to marine discussion. So that's where you can kind of gauge, our confidence levels, like how uncertain or certain is this particular event. And one thing I think Chris touched on, and I agree with, is that, yeah, days 6 and 7, you can expect them, if there's a storm, to change significantly. In days 1 through 2, we usually have a really good idea. That day 3, 4, 5, that's where, things can change in a short enough window that I think it's important for folks to really pay attention to that. If a storm ends up closer to the coast or further away from the coast, or stronger than expected, weaker than expected, that's obviously going to have, significant impact on the winds and seas. So, taking that into consideration, is what I recommend. And, going to the local office, because they have that individual like expertise in that they're familiar with their area. And then you can also go to the Ocean Prediction Center. Those, they give out the forecast for the waters beyond 40 nautical miles, which could be quite useful.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of what's ahead of me is more coastal, right? And it's even probably even more risky. I mean, getting through the C&D and getting down to Delaware Bay and getting to New York and crossing the traffic separation zones, and there's some high traffic areas, there's hazards. It's different than being way out at sea on a course for 3 or 4 days. You do have to worry about weather and have the right window, but I want to make, and we also have Chesapeake Bay, right? We have to be careful of the summertime. We've got some ferocious thunderstorms. They're hard to, they're really, I guess I'm not, Chris, I don't know how easy they are to predict. I have a little NOAA weather radio on board, and it gives me a warning like, hey, it's coming, and it goes off and this big tone hits, and sure enough, minutes later I get blasted by 63-mile-an-hour winds. I did not have that in my forecast, right? So I think coastal cruising and coastal weather can be tricky. Am I wrong, Chris, on stating that?
It can be, but we can assess whether or not there's a risk for that. So something we see often during the summer is there will be, say, just a little impulsive energy coming through, and there won't be many squalls or thunderstorms coming off the coast, but there are a few, and they're, as you said, 60 or 70 knots. And most folks aren't going to see one, but a couple of people will be unlucky enough to be just in the area where one of those small cells hits. And, we're using, in order to resolve those sorts of risks, we're really limited in our tools to some extent, at least in terms of model prediction, to the mesoscale models. So we don't have any input more than about 24 or 48 hours before the event. So you're not going to see that in a 5-day forecast. Some of the global models will hint with a high CAPE value or a high K index that there might be some potential, but in order to resolve the coverage, the potential intensity, and the timing, and the location where that all may occur, we really need to be working 24 to 48 hours before the event, no further out than that, and using the mesoscale models.
Okay.
I would add from the National Weather Service that in all the presentations we do on forecasting weather for your own needs, Absolutely, that forecast discussion, the area forecast discussion from the National Weather Service website. Each local forecast office has that, and you definitely want to be utilizing that. That's a great tool. It gets you in the mind of the forecaster. Actually, if I've got a minute, I'm going to tell a really interesting story about that.
Yeah, we have time. Thank you.
Okay. So a few years ago, I was doing a seminar and I just happened to be looking at the area forecast discussion. And the meteorologist who was on duty typing up that forecast discussion actually said these words. And this isn't an exact quote. In the seminars, I give the exact quote. But basically, he said that he thinks that gales are likely on day 3 of the forecast. But since it's 3 days away and the last shift didn't forecast it, he wasn't going to pull the trigger and put out a gale warning, even though he thought it was going to happen. You wouldn't have known that unless you read the discussion.
Wow.
So read the discussion. They're really good.
Yeah, I think I know. If I went to the link in Marine Weather Service, I think they call it extended discussion. It's more looking at continental United States, and this is like the local one, right? This discussion here.
Each forecast office, if you go to the National Weather Service's local forecast office, the Marine forecast offices, right at the bottom, there is a forecast discussion. Click on the forecast discussion, and it'll bring up a really detailed for marine interests and for aviation interests and for general interests, what the forecaster is thinking, what the risks are in the forecast, and you'll get a lot more insight behind the numbers, as it were.
Behind the curtain. Okay.
Yeah.
I will. I'm gonna add that link to the toolbox. I think I had it out there. I'm not sure. I can take a quick peek here. I come down to that toolbox up here. Is it this one? The extended forecast discussion?
So there's an extended forecast discussion. This is going to be called the area forecast discussion. It's an AFD, area forecast discussion.
Okay.
So
you can send me a link. I'll make sure I get it in here.
Yeah.
And I can send you the link too. If you go to weather.gov, click on the area you want, and then you can click on the area that you want the forecast for. You're not only get a forecast, but there'll be an option on the bottom right to get a forecast discussion.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do it now because I'll probably crash the computer and hit the wrong key, so I'm not doing it. But if you don't mind, Hayden, Frank, could you just go ahead and send the link, please, and I'll kind of add that to the worksheet and make sure.
Sure. What I'll do is I'll send the link from our office, which will take you to our. But you can you go through the same process.
Okay.
To get it through, for Philadelphia, Mount Holly office, Portland. Sure, I will do that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa and Chris and Hayden for the contributions here. I like the idea of adding links that I may be missing. Again, this is a unique approach. It does require a subscription. What I spend on the Marine Weather Center, I almost spend the same amount on bottom paint. Okay, so it's worth the cost to subscribe to these tools and resources, and the United States government, what Hayden does, it all contributes as well, and that there's no fee there. But I really want to be able to, as I said earlier, when I listened to Chris's briefing and he's talking about right here, the weak front slowly approaches the southeast, right, and I can see it, right. And then with an increase in threat of squalls, the front, I got the graphic and it helps me learn. And all of us will grow to be better forecasters over time. But and the Marine Weather Center and everybody else, a rising tide is going to lift all the boats, right? So Chris is getting better. What he's doing with his tools and his tremendous service. Predict wind. There's so many features there. I want to make sure that I use the right ones and I can actually look at the weather models. But I like to revisit it. I do like the idea of the resolution of the models, and maybe one of them, maybe it's the ECCM, or one of them is going to be specific to the Chesapeake Bay area. I'll learn that. I don't know that now, but I'll learn over time looking at the models and how they then look at observations. How well was the forecast compared to what the station is actually seeing right now? You can do that. You can calibrate and find out what weather model is unique or predicts well for your area. Whether it's short term or long term, they all deviate a little bit. But the idea is to bring all three sources together, look at them, and then I'm ready. You know, when I listen to the webcast and watch it, Chris, I'm digesting it, I'm understanding it much better versus seeing it cold. So that's kind of, then I can take this with me too. I can print this and take this with me, and I can update it each day. Okay, I'd like to ask Joan in a second here. So in summary, you know, I have developed this very involved plan. All right, it takes me from, and I'm willing to share that with other folks, and we get comments on it. I have pilotage plans, which I think, you know, for some of the flotillas out there and 30 boats all going together on a summer cruise, everybody can take these little pilotage plans and contribute to them. It's kind of crowdsourcing the information and contributing to them. Everybody can have a good time and focus on safety as well. I came up with 11 pages of hot links of articles and webinars, and include a lot of the webinars were Predict Wind, Chris Parker's past webinars, and if folks want to contribute and make comments against the worksheet, I'd like that as well. So we'll post these documents. Joan's can have a folder within the Seven Seas Cruising Association. If you're not part of that team, you know, the organization, you can contact me. My contact information's available, and I can send you a copy and get your comments. I think we should think about a repository of people that develop passage plans and then share them. I'm willing to share the GPX file for some of the routes that I laid out, and you know, whether it's in hindsight, and then lessons learned. I think maybe it's a cool thing to share the passage plans. I also want to thank everyone, especially the panelists that took time out tonight to attend. Lisa and Chris and Hayden, thank you very much. Joan, I want to turn over to you to see if there are any comments or anything in the chat that we could ask the panelists.
This is Frank. I think I'm going to take the Q&A segment.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions, please go to and click the Q&A button on your screen and ask your questions for the panelists. Michael, I'd like to take a minute and thank you and the rest of the crew for a great presentation. This has got loaded with so much information in it. I don't think anybody appreciates what you went into in detail. 32 pages is an impressive passage plan, no matter how you carve it up. So thank you very much for sharing it with us. I think your idea about a repository is a great one. Does anybody have any questions for Mike? Michael, I think we'll declare victory.
No, Beth is waving.
Beth is waiting in it. Hello, Beth.
I'm
Hey,
sorry, I didn't see that. Hey, Beth.
Guys, hey, great presentation, Mike. It was really thank you again for all the hard work you've done on this. I was going to make a couple comments that I've used Chris Parker, or we have used Chris's service for many years, especially assisting us with the Salty Dog passages to Antigua. And what I've always appreciated is not only just his information about, you know, the overall weather pattern, he puts in context your boat, whether you're a fast boat or a slow boat. And that makes a big difference, because if you were a slower boat, you're only able to do X amount, you know, passage in X amount of time. And that, as Chris knows, that impacts the weather. So if you're out there south of Bermuda and you're a slow boat and there's a weather front coming in, you got a problem. So I think that's the one thing I really want to highlight, is that when it's not just the weather forecast. And the beauty of what Chris does is puts together your boat and says, this is kind of where you're going to be if you go 6 knots a day, 8 knots a day, you know, whatever you can do per day on the average. So that's just one comment I was going to make. The other thing I wanted to just get the group's input. We struggled a lot in our passages coming, you know, back and forth between the islands, mostly in the Caribbean, that we didn't have internet access, because you're making a passage between the islands, and we didn't have Starlink. And so what I would do, unless somebody's got another thought of what we did, and maybe we did was crazy, I would take screenshots of the Predict Wind forecast for like 5 days. Right. Just take a screenshot And that way I kind of know, all right, well, today's Tuesday. I'm not going to have internet for 2 days, but I have a screenshot of what Wednesday and Thursday may look like. Anybody has done that, or any thoughts on that? Or again, so this is again, you don't have internet. You've got no internet. You don't have SSB. It's basically just muscle memory of what you remember to predict the forecast look like.
Go ahead, Lisa.
You're muted.
Hi, sorry, thanks for the question. I will just briefly answer that because it's very common. You know, people go out for a 2 or 3 day trip, or several days, and they don't have offshore connection. So we do have the offshore app, which is a second predict wind app, which we developed initially to be used with a satellite connection offshore, but that can also be used with your internet connection before you leave the dock. So it's like when you're doing your homework before you leave and downloading all of your weather information, you can download it into the offshore app. And it was developed to take your latest download, save all of that information in the app. So as you open it up, if you've gone ahead 24 hours and you don't have a weather connection, you can scroll on the map 24 hours ahead on each of the models you've downloaded and still have that information. So ideally, you would want to be downloading your information once a day or at least every other day, depending on where you are. But if you had to go for a few days, if you do a big download before you leave on your strong internet connection into the offshore app, it's as good as taking screenshots, but it saves all of that modeling information, all of the charts, everything you've downloaded, all of your Cape values, your wind maps, your wave maps, whatever information you've downloaded. So you can refer to that for the duration of the days that you've downloaded. And that's very much like taking screenshots, and screenshots is another option. But equally, there are things like the GMDSS forecast, the weather bulletins on channel 16 while you're out there. So there are lots of a great deal of assets, and that's how I would approach it if I didn't have a connection and going offshore for a couple of days or out of cell phone comms for a couple of days.
So
So that's almost as good as recording Chris Parker.
So Lisa, if I have that data, about 5 days of data, I do the download, I've got it with me on board. Can I rerun the departure planning tool and remodel things without the internet connection then, if I have that data with me?
You can't rerun it as such without a connection. If you had, for example, an Iridium Go or Starlink, some sort of satellite connection, you can do a download with the offshore app at sea. If you don't have any connection, you can't rework it, but you can relook at the information you've downloaded.
So I can take the slider where it's these. I can kind of go back and forth and look at the data over time here.
Exactly. It's very similar, just a slightly different format, and it's downloaded in a much more condensed format to stay on your device so that you can reopen it without a connection.
Okay, cool. All right, good. All right, Frank, any other questions in the chat or comments?
No, Alan, thank you for your comments. That was very nice. We happen to agree. We thought it was an excellent presentation. There are no questions in the queue at this time. So Mike, like I said, I think we declare victory. It came off really well. Thank you very much for taking your time. Thank the other panelists for taking your time to come make this work. It was a great session. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Chris, Lisa, Hayden, appreciate it much. Joan, thanks for the encouragement and nudging me to get this done. Thank you.
Yeah, great
Thanks,
job
Mike.
with it.
Good work.
Okay, guys, thank you. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.